Welcome to the Stewart Squared podcast. I'm here with my father, as we do every Sunday, where we're investigating the rise of the PC industry, the rise of the internet, and the rise of the mobile phone so that we can understand where AI is going and really cut through the hype, because my father has been through many different hype cycles. It's one of the things I'm most fascinated about in our current era, because obviously there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of real value. And so we're going to learn today. We're going to talk, I think, previous couple episodes, we've gone into the first convergence, the second convergence, and the third convergence, which I believe you made up. I don't think anybody else is talking about the third convergence in this way, and it's also tied to your partner, Jim Ward's understanding of reality disturbance. And reality disturbance is a much easier thing to convey than the third convergence. So let's start there. Let's go into, can you talk more about how you met Jim Ward and where you guys sort of decided to do business together?
So reality disturbance is Jim's concept. He came up with it. So I don't want to take credit for it. And at first I was a little bit squishy about it. But once I understood what he was talking about, I'm on board. So Jim and I probably met before that, but he came to work with us at Allsop Louis Partners in 2008 after spending over 10 years at Lucasfilm. And Gelman had known him longer, but I had known about him at least. And so he came and became a venture partner at Allsop Louis. The same time he moved to Phoenix and did some other stuff, which means he ran for Congress as a Republican. And we were thrilled when he lost. Because that meant he could keep working with us, and ultimately became what we're now referring to as a CEO whisperer. So he's not been an investor investing in companies. He's been working with our existing companies, trying to get our CEOs to understand, what was important about running a company and figuring out how to make it successful. So he has a process, which he's trademarked, called the God particle. And in running a company, the God particle is knowing exactly what you're trying to accomplish, so you don't waste time, being distracted and focused on the wrong thing. And so that's kind of Jim's time over the last 16 years with us. And during that time, he and I began to recognize that we both understood the media business. Me from the point of view of as an investor, because I have this track record of investing in media technology companies, more than this, but companies like TiVo and Sonos and Twitch and most recently, Meow
Pokemon Go and Pokemon Go.
Yeah, it's not my deal, so I don't include it.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Government made that investment. Yeah. But Jim has been into Niantic, is the name of the company, to work with John Hankey, the founder, on doing the God particle and so forth. So we have a high level understanding of how the media business evolves over time. And that's where this idea of the third convergence came from. And Jim worked that out. He's great at this sort of conceptual organization. And that's what we're pitching now for our new venture fund.
Okay, so let's go to the history first. I mean, there's a bunch there that I really would love to talk about, but I think we should save it until he comes on the show to understand what the God particle is and how to trademark that. But let's go into the history. Lucasfilm. I'm reading the Steve Jobs biography by Brent Schlender, and Lucasfilm basically birthed Pixar, and Pixar became such an important part of Next, which then became such an important part of Apple. Now, Lucasfilm, the first time I remember watching a Star Wars film was in your mother's house in probably 90, I was 13 years old, so 97, 98, and watched the Star Wars movie. I was just blown away by this old thing that I'm sure you guys had talked about when I was younger. And it was just like, wow, that is amazing.
That's the first Star Wars movie?
I can't remember if it was first, second, or third, but I watched that and I was like, Whoa, okay, there's something here. And I'm sure you told me the story about when you first saw it uh, all around that time. But we don't want to bore people too much with the personal details, although we do like to include them. But the t- Lucasfilms, how did it get started? Where did it come from?
So, and I'll tell you how Jim intersected with him. George Lucas, obviously, that's why it's named Lucasfilm, um, came up with the concept of the first Star Wars movie, but it was uh, a world, right? Uh, it wasn't just a movie. He had in his head that there was a whole world, and it was this good and evil thing between um, uh, the Force and Darth Vader. Um, and so in the first film, you see a bit of that because the first film is a standalone and it is of itself. But the first three films in the series were directed by George Lucas, but produced by, I can't remember which company was the studio, but so by the time the third one happened and it was this massive hit, and of course, George Lucas had become very wealthy just off of that, he wanted to do the next three, which are actually referred to as the prequel, right? Because they happened before the first three. So 4, 5, and 6 actually happened before 1, 2, and 3. He hired Jim to run the business and to worry about revenue and merchandising and production and all the things that he had to do for Lucasfilm to be the producer. And so, and that's what Jim did for the next 10 years. um, and so and this is a kind of historical view, but when they introduced the fourth film, and I may get this wrong, and you can get Jim to correct it, the which was number one in the series of nine. The Jim worked with Steve Jobs to use what was then Apple's new codec or video
Oh,
um, device, not device, but
yeah.
software called QuickTime, the very first. And they distributed the trailer on the internet and used a company called Akamai for the distribution on the internet. And the demand for the trailer was so strong that it, quote unquote, broke the internet. Um, and they were thrilled with that. Right? That's got so much notoriety for Lucasfilm and for QuickTime that, it was a good thing. And so there are a lot of more anecdotes after that, but that was one of the first things he did at Lucasfilm.
Okay, so I just put in on Perplexity, Apple and Akamai formed a significant partnership to distribute movie trailers through QuickTime. Now, QuickTime, I remember using it. I still use it in
Yeah.
order to watch movies. Okay, served over 81,000 simultaneous live views. In what year was this? It does not say. Probably around 2001. No, dated back
Uh,
to 1999, but it had to be later than that. It had to be in 2001 or 2002. Now,
I'm gonna,
and
I'm gonna go I'll get
yeah,
the answer to that.
and 16.5 gigabytes per second of video streaming on at Macworld Expo, and supported deliveries of hundreds of millions of movie trailers. Okay, 81,000 live viewers. That is so interesting. I want to hear when it actually happened, but I want to talk about how we got from 81,000 to millions on Twitch.
Yeah, and live streaming is really important. Nope, that was 1998.
98.
Uh, the live streaming is Twitch. Before Twitch started, now in the case of QuickTime on the internet, and 81,000 live streams, simultaneous live streams, there was no concept of live, right? This is
Yeah.
this is distributing a file that you could play anytime you wanted, but the peak demand on the system was 81,000 people asked to play it at the same time.
Oh, got it.
So that has this impact all the way through. Live streaming is not, the whole way the internet was originally constructed was a distributed system. and you could push content out to the edge so that any one user that's trying to get to that content has it close by them at the highest speed. That was the original architecture on the internet, which doesn't work for live streaming because you have to stream live from a single source. And so because otherwise the streams have different content in them at different timing. And so there was really no concept of live streaming until Twitch came along and developed what it did, which was live streaming people playing video games. And the whole technology that stack that Twitch built was tuned to, start from a single point and have all of the streams go out to multiple endpoints.
Wow.
And so that was the innovation that Twitch did. And that was really underneath why Amazon bought Twitch. The irony of this is just recently, you'll know that Netflix started doing live events. The first of which was this Mike Tyson, can't remember the guy's name.
Jake Paul.
Jake Paul fight. And what happened was Netflix had never done live streaming before, and they had like 180 million people trying to watch this at the same time. So go from 81,000 files being downloaded so people can play it on their computer to 180 million people. And Netflix couldn't do it. There was all kinds of glitches during the fight. It's actually like a 3-hour broadcast, I think. And but by the time they broadcast the NFL games on Christmas Day, they'd figured it out.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
so this scale and how you deploy technology and a broadband internet at the kind of rates of speed that at least we have in the first world has evolved tremendously from 1998.
Brilliant. There's so many things there. Let's go into TiVo. How did TiVo enter the picture? I'm probably sure. I think we probably discussed it, but now it's all gone basically.
Well, it's about the same time. It's 97 is when NEA invested in TiVo. And the product was introduced in 98, I believe. And what TiVo did was sit between the internet and your television and allow you to store things on a hard disk. So you could have X number of hours on video on your hard disk, and then when you wanted to watch it, you could watch it, and it would play off the hard disk. It was clearly not a long-term solution to the problem, if you will. It was a short-term.
And did you guys talk about that? Did you guys talk about how this is? Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you remember your great uncle Joe. He and I argued about this all the time because he thought it would happen much faster. That he couldn't understand what the business for TiVo was because he thought within a few years would be streaming everything. And but
it took longer.
That took more like 20 years.
Did you always know that you were into media? Like, because you've gone into space before. You haven't gone into space. You've gone into space technology. You've gone into deep tech databases, car things, a whole bunch of things. When did you get the intuition that media was the thing that you really got it?
Well, that's part of the story that we tell when we're pitching the fund is, I started out at NEA in 96 as a IT guy. I'd been the editor of InfoWorld, and I knew about databases and IT infrastructure and all of the enterprise technologies. So I didn't identify myself as being particularly focused on media. And I always had the attitude that investing in media technologies is terrible. It's a dumb thing to do.
Why? What was your reasoning?
There have been so few outcomes, so few companies that were, ended up being worth a lot of money before that. And so I resisted the idea of being a media investor, media technology investor. And at NEA, I just happened to do about a third of my deals were in media. Some of them failed and some of them succeeded. And the three from NEA are TiVo, Glue Mobile, which went public, and Xfire, which was sold to Viacom after 2 years. And I made money on all those deals. And but I did a bunch of others, like 4 or 5, to go count them up. But and I don't have the numbers to hand, but I probably invested in like 45 companies over 10 years at maybe 35. at NEA, and about a third of them were media technology. So I invested in companies that completely failed, like uh, shoot, I have trouble remembering it, but I invested in a company that digitized radio streams to put them on the internet, and they would extract the ads in the radio streams and put their own ads in, which they would sell to advertisers. It was a brilliant idea, and it actually is the way things work now for audio streams. Um, but the company didn't succeed. Uh, and I invested in one that was one of the first to license music to be streamed on the internet.
Mm,
And that company also didn't work and got sold for less than
why did there's
that's
yeah there's so many. Okay, I got a bunch of questions, but I'm gonna write down the streaming one after Napster.
full,
But
full audio. The name of that company was Full Audio.
full audio, I remember that one. And then there's Real Networks that also fits into all this stuff that we're talking about. But I
Yeah.
want to.
Real's the one that won on the radio streaming because they had the software.
So how do you track your investments personally? When you were at NAA, were you tracking this stuff, or did they have an accountant that would track it to make sure that and then what are the principles behind investment at a certain date, how you go from the past into the future?
There's two measures for an investment. One is DPI, distributions per investment, excuse me. So you invest $1, how many dollars do you distribute when it's liquid, which can be anywhere from 0 to very high. And then the second one is IRR, or internal rate of return. You invest $1 in January of X year, and you distribute whatever the multiple is over 10 years or 5 years or 15 years, and that gives effect to the time value of money. So if you make a 20x return, but it takes 10 years, it's not as good as like a 10x in 3 years. So, you know, the owner of the money that you're investing this on behalf of is interested in getting that back, the highest return in the shortest period of time.
And so did you do that personally? How long did it take you to understand those concepts?
Well, it was done by our back office at NEA, and it's done at by our back office at Allsup Louis. I don't have a IRR number on my personal investments, but because I don't know how to do that. Determining the time value and getting an internal rate of return is complicated. It's mathematically challenging.
Can an AI do it? Do you think? I wonder if an AI could do it.
Oh yeah, sure. You could. Okay. You could say, but the AI would have to have all the data.
Yeah,
and that's very confidential data, not easily shared.
Let's go into that. All right, there's all these other data. How have in the 1980s and the 1990s, how were people thinking about data security, and making data valuable?
In the 1980s?
1980s and 1990s.
They weren't. They weren't. Yeah. Nobody was putting their data, the confidential data, accounting data, on the internet. Nobody was even using the internet to run their companies. They were still using proprietary local area networks. And it wasn't until the internet got big enough that you had the cloud, right, and started storing data on the internet, even though it was proprietary storage. So now I just listened to an interview by the CEO of Amazon Web Services, Matt Garman, and he said, from their point of view, they think that companies are basically storing about 20% of 10%, between 10 and 20% of their data on the internet outside their premises. And so he's talking about the potential for AWS going forward. It's like if it's only 10% now, if it gets to 40, 50%, it's huge growth for AWS, and still only halfway there.
This goes in directly to what I've been doing now, because AI is changing. I'm back on the horse in terms of programming, because at AI Whispers last week, Philip Galebach gave a brilliant presentation on how he's building, and he's more advanced in terms of programming. And he basically just gave me a GitHub. I used Claude MCP servers last night. Took me 30 minutes, and boom, I had an application that could transcribe and translate both things that I need in my daily life every day, and and for free, totally for free. His whole shtick is basically how to remove himself from SaaS business subscriptions. And I agree with him because I am in a sea of SaaS subscriptions that I need once every 2 months, and I'm paying some ridiculous amount of money and I don't want to go and cancel them because then there's another friction point, and it's like all that AI now. But I want to go back to the specific point, the server. So AWS is a nightmare. It's a total nightmare for me, non-technical, to go in and even get access to the login. Like just to get into the site, it is a total nightmare. And so I stopped doing it. And then there's a bunch of other things. There's Red Ocean, DigitalOcean, and there's Heroku, which I tried last night. And none of them are dead simple. And somebody has to do one dead simple for the wave of people who are about to enter AI programming, who are non-technical entrepreneurs.
I'll have to send you this interview I listened to. It's the Decoder interview with Matt Garman.
Okay.
Because he says he can grow astonishingly just by providing technical services to people who know what they're doing. And AWS isn't just storage; they also do compute and a bunch of other services. I think he said there's like hundreds of them, and they charge for all of it. And but he says it's so technical right now that the benefits of AI will not be available to users unless they change the way that they present it. So he said that's two layers: one, organic growth by people adopting cloud services, and then much greater growth by making it accessible to non-technical users.
Oh, got it. So that's what they're planning on doing. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And AWS right now is $170 billion a year business. So, he can map out going from 170. He didn't put a number on it, of course, but just logically, $500 billion to $1 trillion.
And I almost want to go back. Amazon. Ooh, yeah, let's do it. Let's go into Amazon. So when did you first become aware of Amazon?
Well, it actually gave you this anecdote because I think I remember hearing it when I played it back. We're sitting around a partners meeting at NEA, and I have to remember. Now I'll ask chat just for the hell of it. When did Kleiner Perkins first invest in Amazon? $1995. Wow. 95. I didn't join NEA until 96. So it's the answer is Kleiner Perkins first invested in Amazon in 1995 during Amazon's Series A funding round. The firm, led by John Doerr, invested $8 million for a 13% stake in the company. So I remember that as 5 million, but and later because I was at NEA. But I guess it was after I started at NEA. I said, well, that John Doerr put 5 million, I thought, or 8 million into Amazon, which is an online retailer. And we're all sitting around kind of, shaking our heads going, what a crazy dude, how's a retailer going to be worth anything? And that was Amazon.
Books.
Now Amazon is worth, just books at the time. No view into what it could be in the future, although John obviously understood that. And so now it's worth, I think it's just over 2 trillion, maybe closer to 3. So, if they held on to their stock from doing that, 8 million for 13% is like $50 million valuation. If they held on their 13%, they'd own 13% of a multi-trillion-dollar company. Obviously they didn't, but that's the scale that you want to get into. And so from a venture capitalist point of view, that's like, how the hell did he figure that out? Obviously he was betting on Jeff Bezos, but which was a good bet.
Did you meet Jeff Bezos? When did you first meet him, if so?
Uh, I met him a few times, usually at conferences, but I had enough of a relationship with him that uh, I had an idea for a company that I thought should exist. And at the time, Bezos was famous for anybody inside Amazon that wanted to present a new business idea had to write a press release that documented when that company was announced publicly. And so I got a meeting with him. I gave a couple of presentations at the hardware part of Amazon. Now I can't remember what it's called, but the part that does Kindle and stuff like that. Um, and after I did it in Seattle, I had a time to meet with him, and I told him that I wanted to start this business, and I wrote a press release. Kind of know how to do that anyway. And he did that big guffaw. Everybody knows that when Jeff Bezos laughs, it's like an elephant roaring. And he was so tickled that I'd written the press release that then he read it and said no, but that's a whole different thing.
Well, and I remember this business, and I remember liking this business idea a lot. The idea for the business was, if I'm not mistaken, in probably 2010 to 2013, trying to build a physical store that would sell all the new gadgets coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a gadget store. And it's been tried, and there
Yeah.
have been people doing it, but the dynamics of retailing are so demanding that just doing a gadget store, I think my idea would have worked and scaled, and it would have
It can
become.
work again too.
Well, I mean, various parts of it have been adopted. Best Buy, for instance, does the Geek Squad
Yeah.
because that's part of the problem is if you sell gadgets, how do you help people once they own them?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was also to make it an experience, right? This is before Meow Wolf, but to
Yep.
make going
Yep.
to the store
Yep.
fun and engaging, and that's kind of the customer relationship management for retailing. And a lot of retailing, it just doesn't matter. Customers don't really want to talk to anybody. They want to just go look at stuff and buy it. So it's I'm not an entrepreneur. It's one thing I know. And so that we spent $1 million at Balsap Louis on me pursuing that idea, but I never got it started.
So this is really interesting. I want to go more into you're not an entrepreneur because I would say that you're a different type of an entrepreneur than the traditional start a big scalable business, does all that different stuff, but you are a media entrepreneur.
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically. Yeah, I mean, I started a newsletter and a conference business that was
Yeah.
successful and that I sold. It was not big dollars, but it was a lifestyle business. So I understand the difference between lifestyle and a venture-backed company.
Yeah.
Last thing you want to do in a venture capital firm is to
It's fun to
invest
lifestyle
in a
business.
lifestyle business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless, because
You
there are
end up doing
examples,
it. Yeah.
there are examples of lifestyle businesses that do grow into a potential venture style.
Well, there are people that start companies and never raise any capital, and they end up being hundreds of millions or billions of revenue.
Yeah. But that's like crazy luck thing, basically, that like crazy luck, but also intention that could have essentially built a large business. But what does the venture capital money do? I know we've talked about this many times, but what does the venture money do for a company?
Well, there's theory and reality.
Mm-hmm.
Theory is that if you're investing in a technology business where you have to spend money in order to have the business exist, right? You have to make the technology of the product work.
Yeah.
So you're raising money in order to enable a technology. This is the original idea, right?
Yeah.
So when Arthur Rock invested in Apple, or can't remember who did it, into Hewlett Packard, or that was a little bit of money to give people the time to develop the product before it went on sale. But at that time, once it went on sale, there was no need for more money because you'd have a margin and you wouldn't need money. That theory has changed over time. And now venture capital is huge, right? And they're big multi-billion-dollar venture capital firms. And it's shifted so that, well, the existence of venture capital can create a business where one would not exist. as opposed to just helping get started. And it's an open question. I personally don't think that's a great idea, but there are VC firms that have made
That
a
is
lot
a
of money.
that's a subtle point that I didn't quite understand. I'll repeat
Well,
it.
so
Yeah.
John Doerr invests $8 million in Amazon as a online retail business. Uh, Amazon went on to raise three more
Mm,
rounds, I think, and they raised a total of like 200 million. Um, so
mm,
the first 8 million wasn't to develop a technology; it was to open the doors of the online store. Um, and you could say that that website was technology at the time, but it was e-commerce
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and well done
yeah,
e-commerce.
yeah.
Um, but he wanted to expand faster than the company could naturally expand.
Oh,
So he raised more money so that he could invest in going beyond books. And by the time AWS happened, they were profitable and making money. So they used their own money to develop AWS.
ambition. So it's something about ambition. Like venture
Yes,
capital throws,
speed, scale.
yeah, yeah. Lots of different places we can go into that. I want to burrow into the point about Arthur Rock invested into Apple. So because as a business where they're selling personal computers and they don't need a lot of venture money. So Apple didn't continuously raise venture money until later.
No, they had already developed the Apple One, which was never a product, but it
Yeah.
was a board that would allow a computer to
Uh,
act like an Apple
yeah,
computer.
yeah, yeah.
The Apple II was the first product they created. Arthur Rock put up. So another question. Let's ask
Mm.
another one here. Whoops. No, don't want to do that. How much did Arthur Rock invest in Apple to make the Apple II?
Inference, inference time.
$57,600 in Apple computer in 1977 to help to fund the production of the Apple II. So they'd already designed the Apple II. Um, they just needed money to make them so they could sell them. This investment was part of Apple's first formal financing round, which totaled 600,000 and included contributions from other investors.
Okay, so and I'm just asking now, what are all the investments made after into Apple? Hopefully, it doesn't narrow it down to only Arthur Rock. Oh no, it just went on to Arthur Rock himself, not Apple.
They never raised any more capital.
Wait, whoa! They never Apple never they must have owned debt. They must have gotten debt.
No. I mean, they're very sophisticated now financially, but in the beginning, it was just the two Steves and a few other people. Who was the first CEO of Apple? Who was the
Mark,
first CEO of Apple? Mike Markkula. Yeah,
yeah,
you got it.
Apple, good fundraising, track investment. Okay, okay. Now I have the. Okay, no, yeah. So historical investment in Apple in 1997, Apple received major investments from Microsoft. Oh, that's right. I read about that. About how
Yeah,
Bill Gates
but Apple
got
was already like $1 billion company at the time. So was
got it.
Microsoft.
Yeah, so it's different than venture capital, which is
Yeah,
the initial that's like private equity or
well,
it's
like
already a public company. It's already a public company. Yeah,
people refer to Meta as a startup company, and yet it's worth $2 trillion and has hundreds of billions of dollars of revenue. It's the dividing. Where's the line between startup and not startup? Because
yeah,
people just throw that word around all the
yeah,
time.
yeah.
It's like Stripe is a startup. You look at these companies and they have thousands of employees and billions of revenue. They're not startups anymore.
Yeah.
You can't refer to them as startups just because they started.
Yeah. Well, that brings in a philosophical and historical point, which I find fascinating, and kind of goes back into reality disturbance as well, which is that reality has been disturbed by technology, and now the
Oh yeah.
only what
Oh yeah.
yeah, and now the only real companies are startups. Like that's where the growth is coming from.
Well, that's if you're talking about so that I'm sure that Brent's book and certainly Walter Isaacson's book talked about the reality distortion field that
Yeah,
Steve
yeah,
had.
yeah,
You get into close to him, and he would wrap you up in the vision, and you'd believe everything he said, right? And it'd take kind of an hour to wear off, but while he's saying it, that's the reality distortion field. So what is reality is when you start getting into reality disturbance, you go like, what is reality? Well, the reality now is that venture capital firms are as big as $1 to $3 billion funds, and they're still called venture capital funds.
yeah,
They're just as big as private equity funds, which don't take the risk that venture capital does. So the reality has been distorted
yeah,
in both the venture capital business and in general society because of technology, and that's why everybody's worried about this, the fear of Trump gathering all these billionaires together. And I mean, Biden just gave a speech warning
I
us
thought,
about the
yeah,
tech industrial, uh, which is
complex.
a reflection of what Dwight Eisenhower
Yeah, yeah,
warned about back in the 50s, and except it's tech instead of,
yeah. Well,
military.
that was technology too. And I have realized that I love how history repeats itself. And so Eisenhower is really interesting because Eisenhower was president, I think, after Truman. So Truman, I feel like,
52 to 60.
yeah,
Eisenhower was
okay,
made
yeah,
president the year I
yeah,
was born.
yeah. So Truman, it feels like Trump is the end industrial age Truman, because Truman got into presidency. He definitely wasn't liked by my grandfather, your father, nor Joseph Alsop. They thought he was a country bumpkin who basically was a good businessman, and he brought all his businessmen in there, and that it feels like Trump is like a sort of like a Truman clone, basically. I'm being provocative, but I think
You know about Dewey Truman.
no, 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 no.
So I think Truman was vice president when FDR died in office in his fourth term, unprecedented. Um, so when he ran for president after that to be a reelected president in 1948, he ran against a guy named Dewey, and um, Truman was a Democrat and Dewey was a Republican. And the Chicago newspaper actually printed and distributed a newspaper that morning after the election saying Dewey wins. And this was like a total embarrassment because it's printed and distributed everywhere. And Truman actually won. That's how close that race was. So Truman was never trusted because he was like the vice president to FDR, and FDR was
Oh,
like this giant um, who had won the war and made
yeah.
us a superpower and blah blah blah. And so Truman, you're basically right. I wasn't alive at the time, so I didn't experience this. But so Truman um, basically started the Korean War, and Eisenhower won because he was a general.
Yep.
And
Mhm.
and he concluded the Korean War, which everybody wanted to see happen. And it was a great economic time. So Eisenhower presided it and was 2 terms from 52 to 60. And then Kennedy took over from him. So it's there's this evolution that happens. It's very hard to identify a time like you're talking about, except in hindsight. And so is Trump the beginning of something new, or is he the end of it?
Old, yeah, yeah, interesting. So I just picked up this book.
Yeah, yeah. Doris
You
Kearns
see it?
Goodwin's. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you know this book?
I haven't read that book, but she wrote
Yeah.
the book that blew my mind about Lincoln,
Okay, great.
called,
Perfect.
A Team of Rivals.
Okay.
Um, and Team of Rivals is, my line about that is I maybe because I didn't study very well in school, um, but Obama referred to a team of rivals when he was running for president the first time. And it created a kerfuffle because he's a Democrat citing a book about how a Republican got elected. So I had to go read it, and I went and read it, and I learned so much that sort of flooded me with insight, which is Lincoln was the first Republican president. Um, he was the first Republican candidate too, because the Republican Party replaced the Whigs, who had fallen apart. So you can have a party fall apart, at least back in the 1850s. And and when at the Republican convention where Lincoln was nominated, a team of rivals is how he got nominated, even though there were like 8 candidates. He co-opted the other 7 by appointing them to his cabinet. And but at that Republican convention in 1856, no, it couldn't have been 6. Had to be, yeah, no, he started in 1856, so it was 1855 convention. And the editor-in-chief of the New York Times was the chairman of the Republican National Convention, and so it's a single sentence in the book. And I stopped. I had to put the book down and think about what that meant. And the New York Times was a brand new newspaper, started from the point of view of the Republican Party, which was a brand new party. So the New York Times and the Republican Party started at the same time. And so, all of that says about newspapers being aligned with a political party and, and the mixture between journalism and politics. All of these things have changed, but that's the way it was done back then. So that really provided an underpinning for me to understand kind of how the political process works.
And that's what we'll go right into it, because I want to get into the controversial politics, which are becoming less and less controversial each day, which is fascinating on its own. So now we've got Trump and we've got Elon Musk, who doesn't like to share power. And therefore, Vivek Ramaswamy is now Ohio, becoming governor of Ohio, running for the governor of Ohio.
Well, in theory, he's going to be running as the Republican candidate for governor of Ohio.
Yeah, but these are all side points. I want to get to my lots of people are looking at Elon Musk and being like, yeah, he's going to do it. He's going to do it because he's so good at business. But the government is different than business, right? So from your perspective,
forever. Yeah.
How is the government different from business?
There's no profit.
There's just tax revenue.
Huh?
Tax revenue.
Well, that's revenue. That's not profit.
There's no
government doesn't make money. It's like if you apply basic business accounting principles to how the government operates, this is something I learned quite a long time ago. They don't account for their revenue or expense the way the business does. Everything is cash. It's our entire government, which operates on a budget of whatever it is, trillions of dollars, is run like a corner store, cash in, cash out, right? And
so when they run out of cash, they run out of cash.
Well, they don't run out of cash because they just make more. They print money. There's no constraint. There's no bankruptcy, particularly for the United States of America and its position in the world, because we're what's referred to as the reserve currency. We're the currency everybody else is benchmarked off of. And so anything that happens to the U.S. currency affects the whole world. And yet the U.S. government is not required to make a profit, right? It's just cash in, cash out. So they buy a tank for $20 million. That's a cash expense. There's no capital. There's no sense that tank will last for the next 20 years or 2 months or whatever. But so there's none of that accounting is done in the U.S. government. That is essentially the difference, right? So you have a CEO in a business, and there's this pyramid down from the CEO, and the CEO runs it, and the board of directors watches them do it. And in the U.S. government, you got the executive branch spending the money and Congress supplying it. And the Senate and the House have slightly different roles in doing that. There's no CEO. The president is not a CEO, much as Trump would like that to be.
Now it seems like he's bringing in Musk to be the CEO, but not be the CEO. And now I find it fascinating that Reagan is such an interesting character. I just watched the Reagan documentary on the flight down, or not the documentary, the movie about Reagan. I had no idea that he was a failed actor. I thought he was a good actor. But another side point.
He was pretty successful, but he didn't have a huge career going forward. Wouldn't call
Got
them
it.
failed. Yeah.
Okay. And so Department of Defense grew massively under Reagan. I find it so interesting that Reagan cut everything else but grew the Department of Defense, which makes sense because we were in existential battle with the Soviet Union. Like Soviet Union was an enemy, and so that all makes sense. But now we have the legacy of that, and the Department of Defense basically runs all of their contracts on cost plus, which Trump and Musk are saying they're going to change. One point is I want to understand how are they actually going to change that? How are they actually going to change it from cost plus? Like how does the function of government allow the president to change that? Does the president even have that type of control? Because that's like a president and Congress. Like how does it all
Yeah,
work?
they have to cooperate because Congress is responsible for part of it, and the executive branch
Yeah.
is responsible for part of it. But the I mean, this is pretty high level.
Yeah.
But during World War II, the U.S. was able to build up its manufacturing capacity for military weapons incredibly fast, right?
Yeah.
Within a couple of years.
Yeah.
They turned over production. I mean, they stopped making automobiles and started making tanks or whatever, airplanes, battleships, all of the stuff they needed to respond to the Nazis. And they were able to pull that off. And then after World War II, they didn't really need to make tanks and warships anymore. So they put it back into, they turned those factories back on to consumer goods. And that was an incredible period of posterity. And then during the Cold War, topped off by Reagan, we grew our military at a rate that the Russians couldn't, the Soviets couldn't match, right? So we basically overwhelmed them. We had the reserve currency, we had the money, the natural resources to outcompete them. And the Soviet Union tried to keep up, but they didn't pay attention to their own people, and that's where the weakness came in the Soviet Union. So there was a period after that in the 70s where, well, we used the Vietnam War to continue making military stuff, but where basically everybody looked at everybody else and said, well, we can't support this military industrial complex. We can't keep spending this money. So they actually spent less money, not total, but percentage of GDP, on military. And the military is now only like 3% of the total budget. It's like, whereas when Reagan was doing it, it was like 15%. I may have the numbers wrong, but it's a scale issue. And so the way they solved that during the 70s and 80s was they started doing cost plus contracts to keep some of the military in business, of the military industrial complex. And they actually forced companies to start merging with each other, which is why Lockheed Martin is called Lockheed Martin, because it used to be Lockheed Martin Marietta, and they merged. And then they bought other companies. And so there's only 5 defense contractors now. You can rattle them off. I'm not sure I can do all 5, but Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, now called RTX, General Dynamic, and there's number 5 in there. And they're all an accumulation of companies that used to be independent. And they've sort of carved up the business. And now, Lockheed Martin makes some stuff, and, General Dynamics makes other stuff. And
you got it right. 3% of GDP currently represents, the US defense budget currently represents around 3% of GDP. Cold War in the 1950s was 8 to 10%. Post-Vietnam was 4.5% during the Reagan administration. So he only increased it by 1.5% from 4.5 to 6% of GDP. And then Clinton started balancing the budget by removing the DOD. Wow, that's a new insight. I had no idea that.
Well, what's the majority of spend? When people say, well, how are you going to reduce the cost to the U.S. government? This is DOGE.
So
this
it's
is the
welfare
challenge.
state. Yeah, welfare state.
It's because of Social Security and Medicare and programs like that, food stamps. And so Elon Musk recently admitted that it would be impossible to reduce the federal budget by 2 trillion.
Yeah, there's no way to do it. There's no like all
Yeah.
the campaign promises, but that's
You have to go and you have to go and change the promises
welfare
that the
state,
government makes.
which they can't do. And I mean, in Argentina, I think they can do it. That's one of
They
the
have,
interesting
yeah,
things
because it
about
got
here
so
is that,
bad. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and the U.S. is not in a position where people have suffered enough, and that's like, uh, I don't mean to say that we should be suffering more. And I think technology is about to throw some splinters into everything that we've been talking about. Yeah, okay, for the last 5 minutes, how how the next wave of technology seems really profound. Like it doesn't seem like we're entering into an era like the 1970s or 1980s. Like it feels like we're entering into 19 no, it feels like we're entering in the 1950s and the 1960s with jet planes, nuclear power, like those type of leveling technologies, and electricity. Electricity feels like the big one. Like how will that play into the economics of the situation? The deflationary. Do you think they're going to be deflationary? Do you think these technologies are going to be deflationary for the population at large?
No, and if I could predict that, I'd be putting my money into the prediction, not talking about it here.
Uh,
Um, that could, knowing the future, if we all agree, I mean, we all who talk about technology agree that AI is a huge bet, and some people think it's going to be bad, and some people think it's going to be good. But it's just how we think, right? That's where we're interpreting this, that no one actually knows what's going to happen.
yep.
And so you can't predict whether it'll be inflationary, deflationary, or whether it will change the mechanisms of government enough to have a different kind of approach to government. Um, if Congress thinks that we should be paying everybody Social Security, um, and I'm getting $5,000 a month. I'm forced to because I'm over 70. Once you turn 70, they send you the money, and I'm getting a lot of money, but it's just a fraction of what I make, and because I still work full time, and I sit there and I go like, why is the government sending me $5,000 a month, making me take $5,000 a month? Um, because the rules of Social Security are that if you earn a certain amount of money then during your work time, you have to be paid money out of that. But that process is not funded, right? It's just the government covering it. And there's no, in a pension, you have to have billions of dollars to pay pensions out. Well, we don't maintain a fund for Social Security. It's paid out of current income, and Medicare and all the other welfare payments are all paid out of income. So you have to change that to have a different situation. But as I said, when I was talking about the government doing cash accounting, it is cash. It's cash in, cash out, and we're running a deficit, um, which is referred to as the national debt, but it's not national debt. It's stored in the Treasury as a number, and we pay interest on that. So now interest, here's a really good one. Interest now accounts for more than the defense budget. The interest the government is paying,
Is more than that 3%
or that we're
GDP.
spending on military.
Yeah.
And
I don't understand the interest. There's the like so there's one point like I'm still very unclear on what you just said about it being in a database on the Treasury. But I want to add one thing, which is that what Milei has done is this: he's gone through all the levels of government inside of Argentina and said, you are no longer operating under a deficit. He says, no hay plata, which means there's no more money. Like you have to have a surplus. Now they're in a surplus. So they're in a surplus. Inflation is under control. Recently there was a Bitcoin guy who basically went in and said, oh no, he's not doing a good job for reasons I don't really understand. The economic stuff is so, as I mentioned for this point, that I don't really understand, which is like it's deficit, but they owe the money. What's going on there?
well, the reason I say it's just a number stored in a database is because um, the government can just turn around and start printing more money, right?
Yeah.
So
Okay.
what's money represent? What's a dollar represent? What's the value that's assigned to a dollar? And if you start printing more money, you make inflation happen. It's what Argentina was doing before Milei showed up. They just print more money. And, you remember this from before Milei, the price of goods would change every day.
Yeah.
And you have to have the pesos or these worthless pieces of paper where you have to have a lot of them to buy small stuff. If the government doesn't balance the number that's stored in the database with people's perception of reality, it loses trust. And that's what Argentina did. It's what Germany did in the 1920s. Horrible inflation. And if you can't believe that your currency is worth what it appears to be, then you lose faith in the currency. So it's psychological. It's not like an absolute.
Yeah.
Right.
It's
we
fuzzy.
agree
It's
collectively.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Russia's going through a similar thing right now where their inflation is ticking up because they're printing money to pay for all that.
War is expensive.
War is expensive. And the people in Russia are, probably getting, I know somebody whose kid was killed or is horribly injured, and my money's not going as far, and I'm feeling poor. At some point, they're going to go like, this Putin thing is that's not good for me personally.
Yep.
So that's the balance. That's why I say it's just a number in a database. It's like it doesn't matter.
It's so crazy. Well, that was a really fun one. I guess we're talking about a bunch of reality disturbances, which is really interesting, and I think it is going to be pretty disturbing in good ways and bad ways as we move forward into the future. But we'll find out. Thank you so much for the podcast.
Yep. Until